You know, some of my earliest memories are of me being curled up in my mom's lap and, everything being right with the world. And I know that not all people have that kind of close relationship with their mothers. Some have, trauma attached to them and abuse and neglect. And I know that this image, this idea can even be triggering for many of us. But at the same time, for a whole lot of people, this idea of being wrapped up in the arms of their mother is their first idea or first image of home. And alas, at some point, we all have to grow up and we have to strike out on our own and make a life for ourselves, right? And we have to make our own sense of what home means. I can remember also being a recent graduate and having to go and find my first apartment on my own and try to make it on my own. Not just paying bills, but having a sense of identity that was not attached to my parents, right? Well, it's almost as though humans spend their entire lifetimes often looking to find that same sense of security, that sense that there is in fact a place where everything makes sense, where everything is okay, where all is right with the world. We spend a lifetime trying to reclaim that moment, that memory of what we have wrapped up with our parents. A lot of people chase it. A lot of people chase it, and it seems that everyone has their own different, unique even way of chasing that memory, that hope, that thing that even in some cases was lost, that sense of home. A lot of us fill the void with with what I would call a common translation of the American dream. We fight, we work, we strive, right? We do better, we rise, we conquer, we achieve. We do all of this. We strive for ourselves. We strive for our children. We scratch out success in this scrappy world of ours to try to come out on top. Doing pulls our aspirations into orbit, making it easier to try to grab a hold of them. We can spend lifetimes dedicated for the sake of having and achieving for the sake of security. Ambition can sometimes be an attempt to make a secure home for ourselves here in this world. In fact, it is an almost famous observation that many people actually struggle with their own identity as retirement gets closer and closer, as it approaches. Because so much of us goes into what we do. I know that's true for me. It's true for many of the people I know. Many who are preparing for retirement have a concern. I mean, we could even lean towards saying that sometimes it's an anxiety, but for the most part, that's actually probably going too far. But concern, I think, is a good word over the transition that they are facing. Questions loom over finding meaning in their lives, in the next phase of their lives, and over contributing, right? Of giving back, of being active and even relevant in their world. And a handful of conversations with those that have recently retired, people have mentioned to me wanting to find, their place once they are no longer in the working world. Everybody needs their place. Everyone does. In fact, I would say that this is in a very real sense, the whole makeup of faith. St. Augustine, a very long time ago, like 1700 years ago, famously said in one of his books called The Confessions, "You," speaking to God, "you have made us for yourself, so that our hearts are restless until they rest in you." This is a prayer, practically. He lifts up to God, recognizing that human beings are meant to connect with God, and when we're not, we're restless. And in that restlessness, we are always striving to figure out, to clamor, to find that sense of home that we know we're missing. The content, the makeup of our faith is to find ourselves content with God. To put it another way, the journey of our faith is to remind us who we are and to whom we belong. And that very idea, I think, is the center of Psalm 131. This is a very short little song in the Psalms of Ascent, and it's a prayer, an affirmation even, that tells God, hey, I am not out there trying to conquer the world for my own sake anymore. I found my true home, and I'm content as a baby being held by its mother. Now, the promise underneath, that affirmation has nothing to do really with us and the good work we've done to give up something. Instead, I think it has everything to do with God, specifically with who God is. God, in this telling of it, is the mother, holding us, securing us, reminding us that everything is all right. And I think it's appropriate for us to stop, to pause, and hear the psalm in its entirety. So listen with me. O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things that are too great and too marvelous for me. But I have calmed and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, my soul is like the weaned child that is with me. O Israel, hope in the Lord, and from this time on and forevermore. Everybody needs their place. And I love how that psalm starts off, gets into the middle of saying that I'm kind of like a weaned child. I'm a child that's no longer clamoring or screaming for what its needs are. My needs, I know, either are or will be met. I found peace. Everybody needs their place. Everyone needs their place. Everyone needs that place where we know that everything is going to be all right. All is right with the world. And for some, it is in their work. For some, it is in their pursuits. For some, it is in their relationships. And for some, it is in the comfort of their actual literal home. But the psalm calls us, I think, deeper than any of those realities. And this is a message I think we need more than ever right here, right now. We need the message from this psalm that the truest sense of home, the truest sense of a place where everything's going to be okay, does not rest on civil authorities, no matter how hard they're trying. It does not ultimately reside in certainly the news or the media or even medicine or any of the other sources of potential hope. That the only true home that we have lies beyond all of it. So over the past several weeks, I've noticed, and you may have also, a clamoring to get back to normal. There are a very lucky few, who have found the health crisis to be a welcome opportunity to draw back from the demands of daily life and rest in the comfort and the sanctuary of their own domicile. But for far too many of my friends and neighbors, this experience of the last year has been the exact opposite. The rising tide of good news around the vaccines has lent to us a sense that things have gotten better, to the point where our own church officers here at this church are eyeing that somewhere around the middle of April, we may begin to have some form of in-person worship gathering once more. And I know that that's not going far enough for all people. I get that. And there's a deep-seated need, a deep-seated longing and desire, if you will, to get life back on track. And I think that same need underscores, at least for me, how much we rely on the lives that we have built for ourselves to provide comfort and to provide security. And this uncertainty that we're facing opens up a chasm of discontent for people. We're so wanting to return to the thing that we've built for ourselves, that knowing that we can't return to what we've known is causing so much frustration, anxiety, bitterness sometimes, discontent. We're all in transition these days. We're all living through a time in which we know so little of what to expect. 2 weeks from now, a month, a quarter, a year, forget it. Everyone is in transition right now, and we're anticipating some, new normal that seems to sit out in our near future-ish. So what will we do? What will be our priorities? Who are we becoming? In a way, we're all retiring from one way of living and preparing for something new, longing for the good old days when it was all settled and we simply went along with daily living. And as scary as it may be, it is also one of the most exciting opportunities that we could ever have. It really is. It's one of the most exciting opportunities we could ever face in this life. I'm reminded, in fact, of a friend and mentor of mine. I won't name names because that would be unfair, but it's one of the most grounded people I've ever met in my entire life. And this guy had, at one point, he was a big deal in commercial real estate and development. He had a career of making these huge deals, and he, in some ways, helped define the skyline of one of the biggest cities in the entire country. And yet, when he stopped working, his life just kept rolling right along. It seemed almost uninterrupted. And the way that he found new ways to find passion and new ways to take on leadership and be there for people. It seemed as though life really actually, instead of being something he had to struggle within, life simply moved through this guy. He remained constant. He remained almost eternal. He was a rock for the community, for his church. Well, one day we were doing some leadership stuff for the church, and it was mostly focused on stewardship, generosity, elements like that, and those ministries. And he was regaling the team that had been gathered together with old stories from back when he was a young dad. He'd been in that church at that point for over 50 years, probably almost 60 at that point. Well, he was talking about a discipline that he had started back in his, I'm going to say 30s, maybe 40s, to try to give enough to the church that it stung just a little. Now, I have to say, this was not originally his idea. Instead, one of the older guys that he had looked up to had a talk with him one day and had to talk about that idea, about giving enough that it stung just a little bit. As appetizing, I'm sure it was for him to hear that from this mentor of his, he still tried it. He started giving just enough. He made the commitment, really, to start giving enough that he actually noticed the difference. And so here he was, standing with these leaders 30-something years later, and he's telling these volunteers about this experience. And he mentioned, yes, of course, like it taught him how to budget a little bit better. Fine. It taught him that he actually did, in fact, have enough. It taught him to trust that God was taking care of him. But all of it paled to what came next. He said that the reason that he really kept it up and kept the discipline for his entire adult life practically was because of how happy it made. It made him so happy. This was a thing that surprised him and certainly those that had been gathered that day probably the most. It became the joy of giving. He looked forward to giving what he could away. I get that maybe not everybody is there, but I actually believe that most people are hardwired to be generous. We want to be generous. And it's other stuff like fear and anxiety and other things that actually get in the way of doing it. And that was what was so amazing for this guy. He felt as a young dad that he had to take everything he had and hoard it and hold it together to build something of his own. And this mentor, a friend of his, said, no, practice a discipline of giving just enough away that you notice it, that it stings just a little. And practicing generosity was something that reminded him that to be a human being is to be generous. It is part of our makeup. It's part of who we are. We want to be generous, but even more than that, he rediscovered a new sense of home. He discovered a sense of belonging, a sense of contentment, of being held by God. That he could give and surprise himself the next year by giving even a little more. And he was always being buoyed and held and contented by God's presence. We can choose right now. We can choose to change priorities in our own lives, to redefine what home looks like. We can redefine what security looks like. We can redefine what it means to find and hold on to contentment. We can turn and find a new path rooted in hope and in joy, and in becoming a blessing for those who are around us, secure in the knowledge that we've always had a home in the one who breathes life into us and sustains us. If the Psalms of Ascent, together as a whole, invite people on a new journey of faith, let's say, which I think is a true statement, then Psalm 131 is our first sight of home. It's the first glimmer that we get that we're reaching what we're chasing after. It's out there on the horizon. Our destination is coming into view, and we get this surge of focus that comes in. Psalm 131 reminds us there is always a home that we don't have to build. This psalm calls us back home to where all and everything is right with the world, regardless of what's happening in the world.